History knows him as the man who bent time, who changed the course of science forever. Albert Einstein, a name synonymous with genius. But what if there was more to his story? From a curious boy who failed his entrance exam to the man who became the world's greatest inventor, Einstein's journey wasn't just about unveiling the mysteries of the universe. It was about turning setbacks into breakthroughs and pushing forward when the world seemed to stand still. This is the untold story of a genius who redefined the universe, but never found peace with the very gift that made him legendary. Albert Einstein was born on March 14, 1879, in the city of Ulm, located in the Kingdom of Württemberg, part of the German Empire. His parents, Hermann and Pauline Einstein, were Jewish, though not wealthy. Albert's father, Hermann, worked as an engineer. His mother, Pauline, was a kind woman who supported her children's education, even when times were difficult. Despite their modest circumstances, they had high hopes for their son, as he showed an early interest in the world around him. Albert's childhood was marked by a curiosity that was different from many children's. He would spend hours examining objects, often taking them apart to understand how they worked. One of the first things that fascinated him was a compass given to him by his father. He stared at it for hours, trying to figure out how the needle moved. It was in these early moments that Albert's mind began to form questions about the nature of the universe and the forces that governed it. Although Albert's family was far from rich, they had a love for learning. His mother recognized his potential and encouraged him to read and explore new ideas. Albert's early education was shaped by the books around him, which he read with intense focus. He wasn't interested in typical children's stories. He wanted to learn about science and the world. This early fascination with the world laid the foundation for what would become his life's passion: understanding the mysteries of nature. At a young age, Albert was already thinking about complex concepts, things that most other children didn't understand. He would often ask his parents, "How do things work?" His curiosity wasn't limited to just one area. He wanted to know about everything, from mechanical devices to the stars above. Albert's questions were deeper than the typical inquiries of a child, and his mind was already moving toward ideas that would change the course of history. As a child, Albert Einstein was notoriously quiet. He didn't speak much, and when he did, his words came slowly, leading many to believe he was slow to develop. His parents worried about this and wondered why he wasn't speaking as quickly as other children. Albert's silence often made him stand out in a crowd, and people around him were unsure of how to relate to him. However, what they didn't realize was that Albert's mind was already filled with ideas and questions that he simply didn't have the words for yet. School teachers were concerned by his silence and delayed speech. They labeled him as lazy and uninterested in learning. These labels were particularly hurtful for Albert, as he was deeply curious, but he had difficulty expressing himself verbally. His inner world was rich with thoughts and ideas, but he often kept them to himself, unable to share them in a way that others could understand. This led to many misunderstandings with the people around him, who thought him to be quiet because he lacked intelligence. Albert's quiet nature also meant that he didn't connect easily with other children. While many of his peers played and socialized, Albert was content to spend time alone, either reading or thinking. This solitude was not something he resented. Rather, it allowed him to focus on the things that truly interested him. His early years were spent in a world of books, mechanical devices, and the vast mysteries of the universe that he was determined to understand. Despite his quietness, Albert's family noticed that his mind was constantly active. He spent hours with his thoughts, wondering about the nature of the world and how it worked. While other children were playing, Albert was silently observing, taking in everything around him. This intense focus on his thoughts helped shape the way he would later approach problem solving and scientific inquiry. Albert's silence was not an absence of thought. It was a sign of the deep reflection that would become his trademark. Albert's family was not wealthy, and their financial difficulties were a constant source of stress. His father, Hermann, had tried to build a successful electrical business, but despite his efforts, the business failed and the family faced financial hardship. This failure caused a lot of tension in the home, as Hermann struggled to find new work, and Albert's mother, Pauline, often worried about their future. The stress of trying to make ends meet weighed heavily on the family, and Albert could feel the tension at home. Despite the struggles, Albert's parents encouraged him to focus on his education. His father tried to help him with his studies, but the troubles caused by the failed business made it difficult to give Albert the support he needed. As the family moved from city to city in search of a better life, Albert became even more withdrawn. His attention shifted more toward his intellectual pursuits, where he found comfort and escape from the chaos at home. During these years, Albert's relationship with his family became strained. While his mother encouraged his love of learning, his father's disappointment in the family situation affected Albert deeply. The constant moving took a toll on the young boy. Albert's need for stability and focus became even more apparent, and he began to rely on his own thinking to understand the world, rather than on the support of his parents. As his parents struggled to support him, Albert was left to find his own way. While most children had access to a formal education, Albert had to teach himself many subjects, especially mathematics and science. This self-reliance would later become a key trait of his character, as he would continue to seek answers through his own efforts, rather than relying on others. Despite the challenges at home, Albert's passion for knowledge grew stronger. The financial hardship he faced did not diminish his love for learning. It fueled it, pushing him to focus more on his studies as a way to escape the problems at home. From a young age, Albert was known to question authority. His school years were marked by tension with teachers who tried to force him into a traditional mold. He did not agree with the standard methods of teaching, which focused on memorizing facts and repeating them without asking why. Albert wanted to understand the world, not just memorize it. This difference in approach made him seem rebellious to many of his teachers, who saw his refusal to conform as a sign of disrespect. In the classroom, Albert was often criticized for not following instructions and for asking questions that made his teachers uncomfortable. He was not content with the standard answers given by his teachers, and he often pushed back when something didn't make sense to him. This led to his being labeled as a problem student. His teachers didn't know how to deal with a child who didn't just accept things at face value, and they became frustrated with him. Albert's rebellion was not just against authority, it was a deeply intellectual protest. He rejected the idea of accepting knowledge without understanding it. In his mind, knowledge had to be earned through questioning and discovery, not simply handed down by someone in power. This mindset was a precursor to his later scientific thinking, which was also about challenging established ideas and seeking deeper truths. At the same time, Albert's rebellion wasn't about disrespecting the system. It was about finding his own path. He didn't want to follow the rules for the sake of conformity. He wanted to understand the underlying principles that governed the world. This intellectual independence became the foundation of his scientific work. His refusal to blindly accept authority mirrored his later approach to scientific inquiry, where he constantly questioned and tested ideas rather than accepting them as truths. Albert's early rebellion set the stage for the rest of his life. He didn't just accept things because they were taught to him, he challenged them. This intellectual independence became a defining trait of his character. His resistance to authority allowed him to break away from conventional thinking and pursue the questions that would lead to scientific breakthroughs that would change the world. By the time Albert was a teenager, his interest in technology and mathematics had already begun to shape his future. He developed a deep love for geometry and algebra, which he saw as a way to describe the world more clearly. At the age of 12, Albert had already taught himself basic calculus, a subject many of his older peers hadn't yet learned. This self-taught approach to learning would define his early years and fuel his later discoveries. Albert's interest in mathematics was driven by a desire to find patterns in the world around him. He didn't just want to solve problems. He wanted to understand how things worked at a deeper level. His early studies in geometry and algebra laid the foundation for his later theories of space and time. Albert's mathematical mind was different from others because he was able to see connections between abstract concepts that no one had seen before. In addition to mathematics, Albert had a growing interest in mechanical devices. He would often take apart gadgets just to see how they worked. This hands-on approach to learning helped him understand how things were connected, both in the physical world and in the abstract world of mathematical equations. His fascination with mechanics and mathematics set him on a path that would eventually lead him to theoretical physics. As Albert grew, his skills in mathematics and science became more refined. He began to see the world in equations, thinking in terms of geometrical shapes and mathematical formulas to describe natural phenomena. His growing understanding of mathematics and physics allowed him to approach problems that others couldn't solve. It was during these years that Albert realized that mathematics was the key to unlocking the secrets of the universe. His love for math and technology became the foundation for his future scientific work. These early years of self-directed learning would serve him well in the years to come, as he continued to push the boundaries of knowledge and discover new ways to understand the world. In 1895, Albert Einstein faced a major setback. He had failed his entrance exams to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, a disappointment that could have stopped most students in their tracks. But Albert, instead of giving up, decided to take a different route. He spent a year in Erau, a small town in Switzerland, to finish his schooling. This year turned out to be a turning point in Albert's life, as it gave him a chance to focus on his studies without the pressure of his earlier failures. The time in Erau allowed Albert to reset and move past the frustration of his failure. The relaxed, quieter environment gave him the mental space to think and study more effectively. He took his studies more seriously and, by the end of the year, passed the entrance exams to the Polytechnic. For Albert, this wasn't just about getting into a school. It was about proving to himself that he could overcome setbacks and find a path forward. His success in the second attempt gave him a renewed sense of confidence and determination. The move to Switzerland was also a personal escape from the tensions at home. The financial struggles and emotional strain in his family weighed heavily on Albert. In Switzerland, he found a place where he could think freely without the distractions and stress of his family's troubles. Albert's time in Aarau also marked the beginning of his journey as an intellectual wanderer. He wasn't just following a set path or trying to meet the expectations of others. He was forging his own way, questioning everything around him. The time away from home gave him a new perspective, not just on his studies, but on his future. It was in Erau that Albert truly began to dream big and think about the possibilities that lay ahead, not just for him, but for science. When Albert left Aarau for Zurich, it wasn't just for an education, it was for a new beginning. His journey in Switzerland wasn't just about academic success. It was about building the foundation for the rest of his life. This escape from the old world, filled with expectations and limitations, allowed him to embrace his potential and dive deeper into the world of ideas and discovery. In 1896, Albert entered the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich, a prestigious institution for students interested in science and engineering. This was the place where Albert could finally focus on what he loved: mathematics and physics. The Polytechnic offered a more flexible and open environment than the rigid schooling systems he had experienced before. Albert felt like he could finally pursue his intellectual interests without being constrained by traditional teaching methods. However, his time at the Polytechnic was not without challenges. Albert, like many of the brightest minds, didn't quite fit into the traditional academic mold. The rigid structure of the curriculum frustrated him, as it didn't encourage independent thought. Instead, it focused on rote memorization and repetition of facts. something Albert found suffocating. He was disinterested in subjects that didn't inspire him, and his resistance to traditional schooling grew stronger. Albert excelled in mathematics and physics, but he often clashed with professors who stuck to conventional teaching methods. He didn't conform to their expectations, and as a result, he was often seen as difficult by some of his teachers. Despite these tensions, Albert's ability to think critically and solve problems outside the standard framework made him stand out in his field, that he wasn't just learning from his books, he was learning from real-life problems and experiments that didn't fit the traditional educational system. It was during his time in Zurich that Albert began to develop his own ideas about physics, particularly concerning the nature of light and space. His growing dissatisfaction with the rigid curriculum pushed him to think outside the box and explore alternative scientific theories. Albert was not just studying to pass exams. He was beginning to see the world in a way that would lead to some of the most groundbreaking discoveries in modern science. His time at the Polytechnic was a place of growth and self-discovery, even if it wasn't always easy. By the end of his time at the Polytechnic, Albert had a clear sense of what he wanted to do with his life. He wasn't just a student looking to earn a degree. He was a young man shaping his future as a scientist. Although the system at the Polytechnic didn't always fit his style, it provided him with the tools and knowledge he needed to question the world. These years would lay the groundwork for the scientific revolution he would soon bring about. During his time at the Polytechnic, Albert met Mileva Maric, a fellow student from Serbia who was studying physics and mathematics. Mileva, much like Albert, was serious about science and was one of the few women in the male-dominated field. The two quickly became close, united by their shared passion for physics. They often spent hours discussing scientific theories and challenging each other's ideas. Their intellectual connection was strong, and they began to spend more time together. Albert and Mileva's relationship went beyond just being intellectual partners. Over time, they developed a romantic relationship, one that was built on mutual respect for each other's minds. They shared a dream of making a significant contribution to science, and this dream brought them closer together. For Albert, Mileva was not just a partner in love, but a companion in thought, someone who understood him on a deep level. Their conversations helped him refine his ideas and develop a clearer understanding of the scientific world. However, their relationship was not without its struggles. Mileva faced many challenges as a woman in science, and her own dreams often felt complicated by her gender. Albert, though deeply connected to her intellectually, was sometimes absorbed in his own work, which led to tension. Mileva also faced the pressures of balancing her own academic ambitions with the realities of being in a relationship with someone as focused as Albert. Despite their shared passions, their differences began to show, especially as Albert's scientific career started to take off. In 1902, Albert and Mileva had a daughter, Liesl, but the details of her life remain mysterious. Some believe she was given up for adoption, while others think she died in infancy. The loss of their daughter left a deep emotional scar on both Albert and Mileva. Despite the strain in their relationship, Albert's connection with Mileva remained strong for a time. They were partners in both life and science, but the pressures of their personal lives would eventually lead them to grow apart. Albert's journey through the Polytechnic was not smooth sailing. Despite his clear intellectual talent, he faced numerous struggles. The rigid academic system didn't fit his free-thinking style, and he often felt like an outsider in the world of academia. He was frustrated by the focus on memorization and was particularly disinterested in subjects that didn't speak to his passion for physics and mathematics. While other students might have excelled in these traditional courses, Albert found himself unmotivated by their narrow focus. Albert's dissatisfaction with the formal education system led him to become more independent in his studies. He began to spend less time in the classroom and more time exploring his own ideas. He was particularly interested in theories about light and time, and these interests became the focus of his self-study. Despite the lack of support from his teachers, Albert felt that he was on the verge of discovering something important. He was starting to see the world in ways that no one else was, and this sense of intellectual isolation only pushed him further into his own work. As a young intellectual, Albert also faced personal difficulties. His relationship with Mileva was becoming more complicated, and the couple struggled to balance their academic ambitions with their personal lives. The pressures of family life, especially with their growing responsibilities, added to the stress. Albert was becoming more and more focused on his work, and this focus began to strain his relationship with Mileva. The intellectual connection they once shared started to fray as their personal lives took different directions. In the midst of these personal and academic challenges, Albert began to realize that he had to break free from the constraints of the academic system if he was to achieve his goals. He realized that his thinking couldn't be limited to traditional education. The more he struggled with his studies, the more he came to believe that true learning came from questioning the status quo. This realization was a key turning point in his life, as it would lead him to reject conventional teaching methods and develop his own scientific approach. Despite these struggles, Albert's time at the Polytechnic was a crucial period in his development. It was here that he learned the value of independent thinking and the importance of intellectual freedom. The challenges he faced, both personally and academically, would shape him into the scientist he was destined to become. His rebellion against the traditional system of education was a sign of the bold thinker he would become. In 1902, after graduating from the Polytechnic, Albert Einstein struggled to find a job in academia. Unable to secure a teaching position, he took a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. While this job wasn't glamorous, it gave Albert financial stability and free time to continue his intellectual pursuits. The work at the Patent Office involved examining inventions and machines, and Albert quickly realized that many of the ideas he saw in patents were related to the laws of nature. This exposure to technology and mechanical devices was a constant source of inspiration for his scientific ideas. During his time at the Patent Office, Albert's scientific thinking continued to evolve. He had more time to think and fewer distractions than he would have had in an academic setting. The quiet of the office allowed him to develop the theories that would later make him famous. He spent hours in the evenings writing papers on topics like special relativity, the nature of light, and the photoelectric effect. These were the ideas that would change the course of modern physics, but at the time, they were simply thought experiments. While his job at the Patent Office was far from glamorous, it allowed Albert to combine theory with practical knowledge. He saw firsthand how inventions worked and how new ideas could be applied to real-world problems. This gave him a deeper understanding of the relationship between science and technology, which played a crucial role in his later work. The Patent Office was the perfect place for him to expand his ideas without the pressure of academia. In his free time, Albert would work on his scientific papers, sending them out to journals and gaining attention in the scientific community. By 1905, Albert had published his famous papers on the photoelectric effect, special relativity, and mass energy equivalence, E equals mc squared. These papers established him as a leading thinker in the scientific world, despite his humble job at the Patent Office. The job allowed him to work in isolation, which proved to be a blessing as it gave him the freedom to develop his ideas without the distractions of academic life. Albert's years at the Patent Office were a time of intellectual freedom and personal growth. While the job itself was not what he had dreamed of, it gave him the space to think deeply about the world and to develop the ideas that would later change science. It was during this period that Albert made the breakthroughs that would make him famous, showing that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the greatest discoveries. Albert Einstein sat at his desk in the Swiss Patent Office, staring out the window at the bustling streets of Bern. The world around him was changing, with new discoveries and innovations breaking the rules of what was thought to be possible. But inside his office, the noise of the world seemed distant. Here, Albert examined applications for new inventions, checking whether they were worthy of a patent. It wasn't glamorous, but it was the only job that kept him afloat. Yet his mind was always elsewhere. Every evening, after work, he would return home to his modest apartment, pull out a stack of books, and get lost in the world of mathematics and physics. He felt the tension between his day job and his true passion. The patent office offered him a steady income, but it also felt like a prison to his mind. Every time a new problem appeared, he couldn't help but think of the deeper questions about light, time, and energy, things the world hadn't yet fully understood. Outside, the early 20th century was alive with change. The world of science was buzzing with new ideas, from Max Planck's work on quantum theory to the birth of the atomic theory. Albert, however, was still largely unknown. He was just another young man working a routine job, yet his mind was racing, teeming with ideas that he couldn't share with anyone. While others were making incremental steps, Albert was thinking about fundamental shifts in the nature of the universe. The silence of the office was sometimes his sanctuary, and other times it felt like a cage. While he examined patents, his mind wandered. He had ideas that he believed could change the world, but there was no one to share them with. Still, he didn't stop. Each night, he worked through his theories, writing papers, sketching out equations, imagining how time and space could be connected in a way that no one had ever considered. In the midst of the patent office's mundane world, Albert's mind was already light years ahead. He was a quiet clerk in a rapidly changing world, but in his mind, the world was already in motion, with the answers to the universe's most basic questions within his reach. He just needed to find the right words to express them, the right theories to explain them. And in 1905, everything would change. One morning, after finishing a stack of patent applications, Albert sat at his desk with a new question in mind. Light. It had been studied for centuries, but something about its behavior didn't sit right with him. Why did certain metals release electrons when exposed to light? It was a question that had puzzled scientists for years, but no one could explain it fully. The photoelectric effect, as it was called, didn't fit into the current understanding of light. Albert scribbled out his thoughts on a piece of paper, his theory. Maybe light wasn't just a wave, as most scientists believed. Maybe it also behaved like particles. He proposed that light was made up of photons, particles that carried energy. When light hit the metal, these photons transferred their energy to the electrons, causing them to be released. The more energy the photons had, the more electrons were released. It was a bold idea. In fact, it challenged everything physicists knew about the nature of light. Light was supposed to be a wave, something that spread out and oscillated. But Albert's idea suggested that it had a dual nature, both wave and particle. It was a concept no one had dared to consider seriously until then. Albert wasn't just throwing out a wild theory. He backed it up with mathematics. He showed how his idea could explain the photoelectric effect better than the current theories. When he sent his paper to the Annalen der Physik, a scientific journal, he had no idea that this small paper, tucked away among so many others, would lead to one of the most important breakthroughs in modern physics. His theory about photons was just one step toward the quantum revolution, but it was the step that proved that light and matter itself could behave in ways that defied the logic of classical physics. Soon, scientists began to realize that Albert's theory had solved a fundamental mystery. Light, once thought to be purely a wave, was also composed of particles, an idea that opened the door to a new field of science. Albert had, with his quiet and careful thinking, changed the way scientists would look at light forever, and the world would never be the same. Later that year, Albert turned his attention to another problem that had puzzled scientists: Brownian motion. This was the random movement of tiny particles suspended in a liquid or gas. The particles seemed to move unpredictably, but no one could explain why. Some scientists thought it was just a curious phenomenon, but Albert saw it as more than that. He realized that this could be proof of the existence of atoms, things too small to see with the naked eye. In his paper, Albert proposed that the particles were being bumped around by atoms and molecules, which were too small to observe directly. This was the first solid evidence that atoms existed, as scientists had long debated whether these invisible building blocks of matter were real. Albert's explanation not only supported the atomic theory, but also allowed scientists to calculate the size of molecules, something no one had done before. The idea of atoms wasn't new, but proving they existed was. Albert's work on Brownian motion gave scientists the proof they needed to accept the atomic theory as a fundamental part of how matter worked. This discovery didn't just change science, it changed the way the world would view matter. Everything from the air we breathe to the food we eat was made up of these invisible, moving atoms. As his theory spread, it became clear that Albert wasn't just explaining a scientific puzzle. He was laying the foundation for an entire new way of thinking about the universe. The theories he was developing weren't just about solving problems. They were opening the doors to a new field of science: quantum mechanics. His paper on Brownian motion was one of the key moments in the birth of quantum physics, a field that would transform science for the next century. In 1905, Albert was beginning to see that his ideas were not just theoretical, they had practical implications. His work on the photoelectric effect and Brownian motion was showing that the world wasn't as simple as it seemed. Matter, energy, light, all were more complicated, more interconnected than anyone had thought. Albert had cracked the code of the universe, and it was only the beginning. One of the most revolutionary ideas to come from Albert in 1905 was special relativity. For centuries, scientists believed that time and space were fixed. But Albert, with his unrelenting curiosity, saw that this wasn't the case. He proposed that time and space were relative, not absolute. The faster someone moved, the slower time would pass for them, and the faster something moved, the shorter it would appear to be. This was a huge shift from everything scientists had believed until then. Albert's special relativity theory also introduced the idea that the speed of light is always the same, no matter how fast the observer is moving. This was something that seemed impossible. If you were traveling on a fast-moving train and shown a light, the light should move faster, right? But Albert argued that it wouldn't. No matter how fast you were moving, the speed of light remained the same. This meant that time and space weren't fixed. They were flexible, depending on how fast someone was traveling. This theory didn't just change how scientists thought about light. It also changed how they thought about the very nature of the universe. It suggested that the fabric of reality, the space-time continuum, could stretch and bend, and that the rules of the universe were not as simple as they seemed. Special relativity opened the door for new ideas in physics. Ideas that would eventually lead to understanding things like black holes, gravitational waves, and the expansion of the universe. However, not everyone immediately accepted Einstein's radical new ideas. Some scientists couldn't believe that time and space could be so flexible. But Albert's mathematical proofs were solid, and over time, his theory was confirmed by experiments. Slowly, the world began to see that Einstein's vision of the universe was not just possible, but it was true. In 1905, Albert had introduced the fundamental idea that space and time were part of a dynamic system, not fixed and separate. His theory of special relativity wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a new way of seeing the world. Albert had reimagined the nature of reality in a way that no one had ever done before. One of the most famous results of special relativity was the equation E equals mc squared. This simple equation showed that energy E and mass m are interchangeable. Albert proved that a small amount of mass could be converted into a large amount of energy, and vice versa. This was a radical concept. It meant that energy and matter were not separate entities, but were part of the same unified system. At first, the equation might have seemed abstract, but its implications were far-reaching. For example, it helped explain how the sun produces energy. The sun's energy comes from nuclear reactions, where small amounts of mass are converted into huge amounts of energy. The equation also laid the groundwork for nuclear energy, and later, for the development of atomic bombs. Though Albert didn't predict these uses, the power of E equals mc squared was soon realized. The equation had a profound effect on physics, but it also had a dark side. The idea that mass could be turned into energy led to the development of atomic weapons in the 20th century. Albert later expressed regret over how his theories were used to create such devastating weapons, but the equation remained one of his most important contributions to science. In the years after 1905, E equals mc squared became a symbol of Einstein's genius. It showed that even the smallest amount of matter contained an incredible amount of energy. This idea reshaped how scientists understood the nature of energy, matter, and the universe itself. It was the key to understanding the atomic structure and had far-reaching consequences for modern physics. By the end of 1905, Albert Einstein had introduced ideas that were not just groundbreaking, they were world-changing. His work on the photoelectric effect, Brownian motion, special relativity, and E equals mc squared would become the foundation of modern physics. Albert had begun a revolution in science, one that would continue to unfold for decades to come. By 1909, Albert Einstein's life had begun to change in ways he hadn't expected. While still working as a patent examiner, Albert was now a rising figure in the scientific community. His theories, particularly special relativity, had gained attention, and invitations to speak at universities poured in. But for Albert, the fame was unwanted. He had never sought recognition for himself. He simply wanted to understand the mysteries of the universe. Yet, the world was beginning to see him as a star, and with this newfound fame came mounting pressure. His first academic position was at the University of Prague. Although it was a significant step, it felt like a new cage. Albert struggled with the responsibilities and expectations that came with fame. The constant interviews, the public attention, the recognition of his genius. It all felt disorienting. While other scientists were eager to bask in the spotlight, Albert was more comfortable in his quiet study, away from the glare of the public eye. But the world couldn't see that. They saw only the brilliant physicist whose ideas were challenging everything. Despite his discomfort with fame, Albert's work began to earn him international recognition. The more famous he became, the more his intellectual freedom was challenged by the demands of his public life. Yet, his scientific output continued at an astonishing pace. He didn't just want to be known, he wanted to understand. He needed to keep pushing boundaries, but at the same time, he couldn't escape the weight of his growing reputation. Fame, it seemed, came at a cost. Throughout this time, Albert remained somewhat withdrawn from the growing circles of fame. He continued to work with the same intensity that had defined his earlier years at the patent office. But the more his theories gained acceptance, the more people sought him out. He became a symbol of innovation, yet the fame was often at odds with his desire for intellectual freedom. He found himself caught between public expectations and his own need for introspection. By the time Albert returned to Berlin in 1914 to take up a prestigious position at the Prussian Academy of Sciences, his fame had reached new heights. Yet, the tension between personal discomfort with recognition and professional achievement became more pronounced. The world now looked to Albert for answers, and though he had begun to enjoy intellectual status, he still longed for the peace and freedom that had once defined his quiet life. Albert's marriage to Mileva Maric had always been a complex partnership. They had bonded over their shared love for physics and spent years together developing their intellectual ideas. But as Albert's fame grew, their relationship began to suffer. In the early years of their marriage, they were equals, partners in both love and science. But as Albert's success skyrocketed, Mileva felt the strain of being in his shadow. Her own scientific aspirations seemed to slip away as Albert's fame became a dominant force in their lives. The strain on their marriage reached a tipping point in 1914. when Albert's affair with his cousin, Elsa Einstein, began. Elsa, a woman with whom Albert had a close connection, became the person Albert turned to when his emotional needs were no longer being met by Mileva. Their affair created serious tension in Albert's marriage. Mileva, who had sacrificed much to support Albert's work, could no longer bear the emotional weight of his betrayal. The breakdown of trust between them made their once partnered relationship impossible to repair. By the time Albert was offered a prestigious position in Berlin, he and Mileva were already on the path to separation. The affair with Elsa and the ongoing emotional distance between Albert and Mileva played a significant role in this decision. The intellectual collaboration that once brought them together had faded, replaced by deep emotional scars. Mileva, torn between her own scientific ambitions and the painful reality of Albert's infidelity, decided that she could no longer remain in a marriage defined by betrayal. The separation, though inevitable, left both Albert and Mileva in a state of emotional turmoil. Albert, despite his growing fame and scientific acclaim, faced deep internal conflict. Mileva, on the other hand, felt the profound loss of the relationship that had been so intellectual and emotional early on. The pressure of living in Albert's shadow had left her with no space for her own personal growth. Their separation was not just a personal blow, but a reflection of the tension between their intellectual lives and their personal choices. Despite their separation, Albert and Mileva continued to share the responsibility of raising their two children. The rupture in their relationship would remain a part of Albert's personal story, a source of regret that he would carry for years. Though their professional and intellectual connection had been broken, Mileva remained an important figure in Albert's life. The separation marked the end of their shared journey, but their intellectual bond remained, though strained. By 1915, Albert Einstein was ready to take the next step in his scientific journey. His work on special relativity had shaken the world of physics, but he knew there was more to understand. The force of gravity, the most basic and seemingly universal force, still remained a mystery. Albert had long been dissatisfied with the Newtonian understanding of gravity, which treated it as a force that acted at a distance. He believed that there had to be a deeper explanation, something that connected gravity to the fabric of space and time itself. For years, Albert had been working on the theory of general relativity, a concept that sought to explain how mass and gravity interacted with space-time. But the theory was incredibly complex, and Albert often found himself struggling with the mathematical equations. He worked tirelessly, day and night, trying to understand how gravity could be understood as the curvature of space-time, rather than a simple force. The struggle was intense, and there were many times when he felt like he was on the edge of a breakthrough, but just couldn't grasp it fully. As Albert wrestled with the equations, he began to realize that the key to the theory lay in understanding space-time itself, how mass could cause curvature in the very fabric of space, affecting the motion of objects. This new understanding was so radically different from anything previously proposed that it seemed impossible. But slowly, piece by piece, the theory began to fall into place. Albert had uncovered a new way of looking at the universe, one that was based on geometry rather than forces. The process of developing general relativity was long and often frustrating. There were many false starts and moments when Albert felt as though he might never complete his work. But in 1915, after years of effort, he finally published his general theory of relativity. It was a revolutionary theory that suggested gravity was not a force at all, but rather a curvature of space-time caused by the presence of mass. The theory changed everything, and the scientific community was left stunned by the audacity and depth of Albert's ideas. While Albert was celebrated for his theory, he also knew that it would be many years before its implications were fully understood. The predictions of general relativity, such as the bending of light around massive objects, would need to be tested. But Albert was confident that the universe itself had revealed its deepest secrets to him. His theories had not just changed physics, they had transformed the very way humans would view the universe. Despite the success of his theories, Albert Einstein faced an ongoing identity crisis, one that had both personal and professional dimensions. As his fame grew, so did the expectations placed on him. He was no longer just a scientist, he was now a public figure, expected to represent the ideals of modern science. But Albert was uncomfortable with this role. He was an intellectual at heart, and the constant pressure to speak at public events, to write books, and to answer questions from the press made him feel more like a celebrity than a scientist. On a personal level, Albert found himself at odds with his growing fame and the toll it took on his relationships. His marriage with Mileva had ended, and he was left to navigate the complexities of being a single father and a world-renowned scientist. His relationship with his children became strained as his work continued to consume him. In many ways, the success he had achieved in the scientific world left him feeling empty in his personal life. The more famous he became, the more he felt the weight of being constantly in the public eye. Albert's professional identity was equally complex. He had become synonymous with the theories of relativity, but he was still searching for answers to questions that remained unresolved. There were still so many aspects of the universe Albert had yet to understand. His work on unifying the forces of nature was just beginning, and despite his fame, he knew that there was still much to do. The pressure to continue delivering groundbreaking ideas was immense, and Albert often questioned whether his fame was distracting him from his true intellectual purpose. In the midst of all this, Albert still felt the need to create, to think deeply about the questions that had always haunted him. He wasn't concerned with being the most famous scientist, he just wanted to understand the universe. But as his career progressed, he began to realize that intellectual freedom and the ability to question everything came with a price. He felt conflicted between his personal desires and the professional role he was expected to fulfill. The more his fame grew, the more he longed for the quiet days of intellectual solitude he had once known. As the years passed, Albert's identity continued to evolve. He had started as a reluctant clerk in Bern, but now he was one of the most famous men in the world. His professional success was unmatched, but the personal cost weighed heavily on him. Fame had brought him success and recognition, but it had also changed the way people saw him and the way he saw himself. Albert's struggle to balance his public life with his intellectual integrity would continue to define his journey. In 1919, Albert Einstein's theories would finally be tested in a way that the world could see for itself. The solar eclipse that year provided a perfect opportunity to prove one of the most radical predictions of his general theory of relativity. According to Albert's equations, light from distant stars should be bent as it passed near the sun, a phenomenon that had never been observed. The only way to test this prediction was during a solar eclipse, when the sun would block out the light, allowing scientists to observe the bending of starlight. The British astronomers Arthur Eddington and Frank Dyson led an expedition to observe the eclipse in West Africa and South America. Their goal was to measure the light from stars as it passed near the sun's gravity. When the results came in, they confirmed Albert's theory. The light had bent exactly as he had predicted. This was the first major confirmation of Einstein's general relativity, and it sent shockwaves through the scientific world. The news of this discovery spread rapidly. For Albert, the confirmation of his theory was a moment of vindication. The world had finally seen the truth of his ideas. But for Albert, the moment was bittersweet. His personal struggles, his separation from Mileva, and the constant public pressure had taken their toll. Still, the eclipse confirmed that general relativity was not just a theory. It was a new understanding of how the universe worked. In the aftermath of the eclipse, Albert's fame skyrocketed. He was no longer just a theoretical physicist. He was now a global icon. But despite the overwhelming praise and attention, Albert remained a private man, focused on his work. The world had finally recognized his genius, but for Albert, The true reward was knowing that he had discovered something fundamentally true about the nature of space, time, and gravity. The eclipse of 1919 was the moment when the world finally saw Albert Einstein for who he truly was, a man who had transformed our understanding of the universe. But even with all the fame, Albert knew that there were still many questions left to answer. The journey was far from over, and his work in general relativity was just the beginning of his contributions to science. Albert Einstein stood before a crowded room of intellectuals, his Nobel Prize in his pocket, and his thoughts heavy with the weight of the world. The applause rang in his ears, but he felt detached, as if the cheers and congratulations were for someone else. To the public, Albert was not just a scientist, he was a symbol of hope, a man whose theories about light and time had shattered old ideas. But inside, Albert wrestled with the question, was he truly changing the world, or just playing his part in a never-ending quest for truth? His rise to fame wasn't an overnight occurrence. Over the years, Albert's work had earned him respect, but now it was much more than that. Global fame was beginning to feel more like a burden than an achievement. He could no longer walk through the streets of Berlin without being stopped by admirers, scholars, and journalists, all eager for his opinion on the issues of the day. He had become more than just a physicist. He was now a philosopher of the world, a figure to whom people turned for answers to not only science, but also moral dilemmas. Albert's fame didn't just come from his scientific achievements. His growing involvement in global issues, especially his advocacy for peace and social justice, made him a figure whose voice was heard beyond the confines of the scientific community. He spoke out against war, the rise of totalitarian regimes, and the misuse of science for destruction. Yet, with every speech and article, Albert felt himself drifting further from the quiet life of contemplation he once enjoyed. The world had placed a new identity on him, one that demanded answers, opinions, and actions. But Albert wasn't sure he was the right person for such expectations. As Albert grew older, his thoughts shifted beyond the laboratory and the classroom. He began to see his role in the world differently, not just as a scientist, but as someone who could use his influence for the greater good. His support for Zionism, his opposition to militarism, and his calls for international cooperation were as much a part of his legacy as his groundbreaking theories. But at times, he wondered if his political activism had become just another way for the world to see him, another mask he wore to fit into a society that constantly needed him to be more than just a thinker. Despite his fame, Albert often yearned for peace, the peace that came from solitude, from working quietly on the questions that had always fascinated him. But now, that peace seemed like an impossible dream. His fame, while earned, felt like a heavy weight, pulling him in directions he wasn't always ready to go. Yet, as a global philosopher, Albert couldn't turn away from the call of the world. He knew that his voice mattered, even if it meant sacrificing the quiet life he had once cherished. Albert's public life was defined not just by his scientific work, but by his advocacy for peace and his vision of a better world. As the 1920s wore on, Europe was struggling to recover from the devastation of World War I. Albert, who had long been a pacifist, spoke out passionately against war, militarism, and the growing rise of authoritarian governments. He believed that true progress in the world could only be achieved through peaceful means and the sharing of knowledge, not through violence. But Albert's thoughts on Zionism made him a controversial figure. While he supported the idea of a Jewish homeland in Palestine, he believed that this should not come at the expense of the Arab population. His vision of Zionism was not about creating a Jewish state separate from others, but about coexistence and peace between Jews and Arabs in the region. His ideas about peaceful coexistence were considered radical by many at the time, especially as tensions in the region were escalating. Some criticized him for not supporting a more nationalistic version of Zionism, while others thought his views were too idealistic. Despite the criticisms, Albert remained committed to his beliefs. he believed that intellectual and moral progress had to come hand in hand with the political changes of the world. He saw Zionism as a way for Jews to find a safe homeland, but believed that peace between nations could only be achieved by understanding and mutual respect. His advocacy for peace was not just about political ideas. It was about his vision of the future, a future where humanity could overcome the divisions of race, religion, and nationality. While his political views were not always popular, they were never out of step with the deep moral convictions that guided Albert's life. In 1921, Albert was offered the presidency of the State of Israel, an honor he declined, not because he didn't believe in the Zionist cause, but because he felt he was unqualified to lead a country. Instead, he focused on advocacy, working behind the scenes to build support for the establishment of a Jewish state, while also championing coexistence with the Arab population. Albert's stance on Zionism and peace was shaped by his experiences, both personal and intellectual. He knew that the future of humanity would depend on dialogue, understanding, and cooperation. His voice, one that had once only been heard in the quiet corners of the scientific community, was now shaping political discourse around the world. And though he faced criticism, Albert knew that he had to speak out, even when it wasn't easy. For him, the fight for peace and human rights was as much a part of his mission as the fight for scientific truth. The years following Albert's breakthrough in relativity brought him scientific recognition on a scale he had never anticipated. In 1921, he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics, not for his work on relativity, but for his explanation of the photoelectric effect. His name had become synonymous with scientific genius, and he was now a global figure, celebrated wherever he went. Yet, the public acclaim did little to ease the personal struggles that were beginning to weigh on him. His separation from Mileva Maric, whom he had married in 1903, had already taken a toll on his emotional well-being. The breakdown of their marriage had been painful, but his work had kept him going. Now, as he continued to rise in fame, the emotional consequences of his personal decisions were becoming more difficult to ignore. Albert had a difficult time balancing his personal life with the expectations placed on him by the world. His relationship with his two sons, Hans Albert and Eduard, was equally strained. Hans Albert, the elder son, struggled with his own emotional issues, while Eduard, his younger son, was diagnosed with schizophrenia. The burden of being a father while being constantly consumed by his work was a heavy one for Albert. Though he tried to be a supportive father, the demands of his intellectual pursuits often left him emotionally unavailable. The personal toll of fame, however, was not just limited to his family. As Albert's scientific theories were accepted and celebrated around the world, his emotional isolation deepened. The more famous he became, the harder it was for him to find true intellectual companions. His colleagues admired him, but very few could understand the weight of the intellectual struggles he faced. Despite the recognition, Albert's sense of personal loss was profound. Albert's scientific recognition came at a price. He was now a public figure, but the privateness of his life was slipping away. The honors and awards piled up, but they didn't fill the emptiness he sometimes felt. As his scientific career soared, his personal world felt increasingly fragmented. He had become an icon, but at the expense of his personal happiness. The rise of anti-Semitism in Germany in the early 1930s shook Albert to his core. As the Nazi Party gained power, Jews like Albert became targets for public hatred. His once beloved homeland, where he had spent much of his career, was now becoming a hostile environment for anyone of Jewish descent. The rise of Hitler was not just a political shift. It was a personal betrayal. Albert, who had always been proud of his Jewish heritage, found himself increasingly isolated from his own country. Albert was already a vocal critic of the growing totalitarianism in Europe, but as the Nazi regime took hold, he realized that he was no longer safe in Germany. The Nazis labeled him a Jewish intellectual and enemy of the state. His scientific work, once celebrated, was now under attack. His relativity theory was dismissed by Nazi scientists as Jewish science, and his work was ridiculed in the press. Albert knew that he could no longer remain in Germany. He was at personal risk, and the country he had once loved was now a place of danger. In 1933, Albert left Germany for Princeton, leaving behind his academic position and the life he had known. His departure marked a turning point, not just in his personal life, but in the history of Europe. He had become a refugee, a citizen of the world, forced to flee from the rise of fascism in his homeland. The country that had once embraced his genius was now a place where his very identity made him a target. The decision to leave Germany was not easy. Albert had spent much of his life in Europe, and now he was being forced to leave behind his home, his friends, and his colleagues. But the rise of the Nazis made it impossible for him to stay. His work had made him a symbol of intellectual resistance, and the Nazis had made it clear that he was no longer welcome. His departure from Germany was a political statement and a personal turning point. He was now a stateless refugee, forced to seek asylum in the United States. Arriving in Princeton, Albert was welcomed by the scientific community, but was haunted by the idea that he could never return to Germany. The scientific work he had started in Europe had been interrupted, but the personal cost of his exile was immense. Albert, now in his 50s, had spent his entire adult life in Germany, and leaving it behind marked the end of an era in his life. His intellectual home was now in America, but the emotional toll of leaving his homeland weighed heavily on him. In the United States, Albert found new opportunities for research, but the political environment was shifting. The world was on the brink of war, and Albert knew that the discoveries he had made could now be used for destructive purposes. As a refugee in America, Albert was now facing not just personal loss, but the growing realization of the consequences his work might have on the world. Would his scientific breakthroughs be used to build weapons of mass destruction? Albert would soon find himself at the center of this debate, struggling with the implications of his own legacy. Albert Einstein sat in his quiet study, a room filled with books and papers, as the world outside raced forward. By the mid-1940s, he had achieved more than most could dream. Yet, as he reflected on his life, a new set of questions began to occupy his mind. What is the meaning of life? Is there a greater force in the universe? What is the role of human beings in this vast cosmos? For many, Einstein was a symbol of reason and rationality, but in private, he often expressed a deep sense of awe at the universe. While he didn't believe in a personal God, Albert felt a spiritual connection to the natural world. His faith was not traditional, but he believed that there was a grand design behind the universe, a universe governed by laws of reason and order. He referred to this force as the God of Spinoza, a God not interested in human affairs, but in the beauty of nature and its inherent laws. This view was deeply connected to his scientific philosophy. Albert often spoke about how the more he learned about the universe, the more amazed he was by its complexity and precision. He felt a sense of spirituality, not through religion, but through the vastness of space, the interconnectedness of all things, and the way everything seemed to follow natural laws. For him, the universe was not a random, chaotic place, but one of incredible order, even if that order was still beyond human understanding. Yet, the atomic bomb and the devastation it brought to Hiroshima and Nagasaki had a profound impact on Albert's views. He had long advocated for peace, but now he felt the weight of his own contributions to the creation of such a destructive force. The realization that his work, meant to be for the greater good, had played a role in creating weapons of mass destruction deeply troubled him. It was a conflict that would continue to shape his moral reflections until the end of his life. In his later years, Albert remained skeptical of religious dogma, but he never lost his belief in humanity's potential for greatness. He felt that reason, scientific inquiry, and a moral commitment to peace were the keys to a better future. But the idea of God and the universe, to him, was mysterious. a mystery that might never be fully solved, but one that he would continue to explore through both science and philosophy. Albert's greatest scientific ambition in his later years was to complete a unified theory, one that would combine his theories of relativity with the emerging field of quantum mechanics. Throughout the 1920s and 1930s, Albert had watched as quantum theory exploded in popularity, with Niels Bohr, Werner Heisenberg, and others making revolutionary discoveries. Yet, Einstein had never fully embraced quantum mechanics. The theory, while powerful, seemed incomplete to him. Albert's deep conviction was that there must be a single framework, a unified field theory, that could explain not just gravity and light, but all the fundamental forces of nature. While others were focusing on the uncertainty and probability of quantum mechanics, Albert believed that the universe must follow definite laws, not governed by chance. He sought to show that the force of gravity could be unified with the electromagnetic force, leading to a theory that would explain everything in the universe. The years passed, but the equation never came. Albert's frustration grew as he worked tirelessly, trying to reconcile his theory of general relativity with quantum mechanics. While his earlier breakthroughs had made him a celebrated figure, the quest for the unified theory seemed to escape him. He was often isolated, working alone in his study in Princeton, trying to solve the puzzles that no one else had been able to. His colleagues began to move away from his approach, focusing on quantum theory and the uncertainty principle. Yet, Albert continued to believe that the universe operated according to definite laws, even if they were yet to be discovered. In his mind, the unified theory would be the final step in understanding the structure of the universe, a step that had eluded him for so long. Though Albert never completed his theory, his search for truth laid the groundwork for later advancements in physics. His insistence on seeking order in the universe, on believing that everything was connected by natural laws, would inspire the next generation of scientists. Albert may not have found the answer, but his quest was far from in vain. As Albert reflected on the universe, he also turned his thoughts inward, to the human condition. Having witnessed the horrors of World War I, the rise of Nazism, and the devastating impact of the atomic bomb, Albert became increasingly concerned with humanity's future. His experiences led him to question the very nature of humanity. How could a species capable of such genius also be capable of such destruction? Albert's thoughts on morality evolved as well. As a scientist, he had always believed that reason could solve the world's problems. But the atrocities of the 20th century made him question this belief. The discovery of nuclear weapons, in particular, filled him with guilt. He had helped make the bomb possible, and now he feared the potential for total annihilation. He became a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament, calling for nations to come together to prevent the use of atomic weapons. But Albert's thoughts on morality were not limited to just the bomb. He believed that nationalism was one of the greatest threats to peace. He saw the rise of fascism and totalitarianism as a direct result of unchecked national pride and ethnocentrism. For Albert, the true moral responsibility of humanity was to put aside these differences and work for the common good. He often spoke of global cooperation and human rights, pushing for an international community based on reason, justice, and peace. Despite his efforts, Albert saw humanity continuing down a destructive path. He believed that while science could provide solutions, it could not solve the moral dilemmas of the world on its own. The moral choices humans made were just as important as the technological advancements they pursued. Albert felt that if science and morality didn't go hand in hand, humanity would face devastating consequences. But despite his advocacy, he remained unsure whether humanity could ever fully embrace the moral path he envisioned. The challenge, he believed, was not just understanding the universe, but understanding how to live in it responsibly. Albert Einstein's role in the development of nuclear weapons remained one of the most significant and controversial aspects of his life. In the early years of World War II, Albert had signed a letter to President Roosevelt, urging him to begin atomic research, fearing that Nazi Germany might develop the bomb first. But when the weapon was finally used in 1945, it filled Albert with deep regret. The bomb, which he had once helped bring into existence, had now caused immeasurable suffering in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. In the aftermath, Albert became a strong advocate for nuclear disarmament. He spoke out against the dangers of nuclear weapons, warning that their existence could destroy humanity if misused. He joined peace movements, urging world leaders to work together to limit the spread of atomic weapons. His commitment to global peace and nuclear ethics became central to his later years. Albert knew that the future of humanity was no longer just about scientific progress. It was about how humanity would choose to use the knowledge it had gained. Albert's regret over the atomic bomb didn't stop him from speaking out against the dangers of nuclear arms. He believed that science had an ethical responsibility to ensure its discoveries were used for good, not for destruction. As the Cold War escalated, Albert became increasingly vocal in his calls for nuclear disarmament, working with other scientists and leaders to create international agreements that would prevent the further development of nuclear weapons. But Albert also realized that the challenge was not just scientific. The moral choices humanity made, how we treat each other, how we approach peace, and how we govern our nations would shape the future. He hoped that the peace movements he supported would be the beginning of a new era of global cooperation. But the rise of totalitarian regimes and the arms race in the years following the war left him with mixed feelings. Albert Einstein passed away on April 17, 1955, at the age of 76, leaving behind a legacy that would shape science, philosophy, and politics for generations to come. Though his body was gone, his ideas lived on. He had spent his life questioning the universe and its mysteries, and in doing so, had transformed our understanding of reality. The question of immortality was something Albert had often contemplated. He didn't believe in a personal afterlife, but he did believe that ideas and knowledge could live forever. In his final years, Albert had come to see that immortality wasn't about living forever in the traditional sense. It was about the ideas and discoveries we leave behind. His theories, particularly relativity, quantum mechanics, and his advocacy for peace, would continue to shape the world long after his death. To Albert, immortality was not about the physical body. It was about the mind, about how our thoughts and actions can influence future generations. Today, Albert's work still resonates. His scientific breakthroughs have revolutionized how we understand the universe, and his moral philosophy continues to inspire movements for peace and human rights. But the question of whether Einstein was right about God, the universe, and immortality remains open for future generations to explore. His legacy, however, is clear. His life and work have given the world a new way to think about the mysteries of existence.